Hi, this is Matt Allard.
And Erik Naso with NewsShooter.com.
And you're listening to The Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I am a director and owner of BC Media Productions, and this is The Go Creative Show, the show dedicated to creative professionals in the video production and filmmaking industries. Matt Allard and Erik Naso from NewsShooter.com join us today to discuss all the news and announcements from NAB 2018. The Go Creative Show is supported by Rule Boston Camera, Buy, Rent, Create at Rule.com, NewsShooter.com essential news for real-world shooters, Hedge, the fastest way to back up media, Shutterstock.com, and PremiumBeat.com, premium, royalty-free music and sound. Well, if you're like me and couldn't get to NAB this year, don't worry. Even if you were at NAB, this is going to even enhance your knowledge and enhance your experience of being at NAB. Because we have Matt Allard and Erik Naso from NewsShooter.com talking about everything you would ever want to know about the event. Of course, everything we talk about, I will put links to in the show notes, and we have a lot to discuss, so we are going to dig right in. But before we get there, I want to talk about Rule Boston Camera. Rule is the place to go to purchase and rent all of your production equipment, but it goes so much more beyond that. Let me give you an example. This week, I had a 3-day shoot, and we had a very specific, particular way we needed to monitor our cameras because we had 5 cameras, and we needed to make sure that the director had 4 of those cameras in his monitor. Now, I didn't know, but this is a little bit more challenging than I thought. And when I called them and told them, I told them we have 5 cameras, I'm renting all the equipment, getting the order ready, we started talking about the specific needs of this shoot. And the assistance that I got while working with them was incredible. They know everything about everything. It's insane what these guys know. They had suggested a particular monitor that would allow me to get the quad switch. They suggested specific ways to get our cabling all organized to make sure that we can get the time code sent to where it needed to go. There was just so many specifics with this shoot, and Rule helped me the entire way. And of course, the equipment that we got was in flawless condition and worked perfectly. And had I needed assistance, I would be able to call them and get the assistance I need. But what it comes down to is peace of mind, because I know that they're going to educate me on the best purchase to make, or the best rental purchase to make for this project. I know that they know everything about the equipment that I've rented from them, and if I have questions, they'd be able to answer it. The price is always right. They delivered on time. They took it back on time. It's such a great experience when you're working with Rule. In addition to that, they have an incredible selection of gear. So they have a huge selection of lenses. The company's been around for 35 years, so you can imagine the stuff they have lingering around in there. They got a huge selection of lenses, every camera you could ever imagine, audio, lighting, grip gear. It's maddening how much they have. If I was the one having to organize that, I would lose my mind. So I don't know how these guys do it. Just that in and of itself is impressive. So check them out. Buy some stuff, rent some stuff. You will love it. Rule.com, RULE.com. All right, it's time for our spotlight. NAB 2018. So much news to get to. We are just going to dive right in. We've got Matt Allard and Erik Naso on the scene telling us everything we need to know about NAB 2018. So I'm here with Matt Allard and Erik Naso from NewsShooter.com. Once again, you guys nailed it this year at NAB. You always do. But you do such a great job with all the coverage, and I know our listeners especially are checking out your site constantly to see what is all the news in the production industry. So that's what we're here today to talk about. So thanks, guys, for being on.
Well, thanks for having us, sorry.
There is so much to talk about, as usual. More to talk about than can fit on the show. And everything we mentioned today will be linked in the show notes, but you guys can very easily just go to NewsShooter.com and see all this stuff. One thing I want to mention is that the good thing is we have this NAB 2018 mega thread on NewsShooter. So you can just search NAB on the site and just go right to that thread. It has all the links and lots of articles that you can just literally just take all this stuff in pretty quickly. So definitely do that if you want to know more about what happened at NAB. Yeah, I'm actually looking at it right now. This is perfect. You guys did a lot of work on your site in the past couple of years too, and it gets better and better and easier to find stuff. So well done on that. That is not an easy task.
Yeah, Matt does all that. He likes to write code.
You do.
What's code? You're talking the language of a 20-something person, Eric. I've got no idea what you're talking about.
I know, right?
I didn't even know how to use
Well,
our site correctly until Eric showed me at NAB, and I've only been using it for like 7 years. So there you go. That shows my technical know-how of coding and WordPress and that sort of thing.
I remember being the youngest person in the room, and it doesn't feel like that long ago, but now clients are like in their 20s. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? How can this be my client? It's outrageous. But I'm the older guy, I guess, now, and with that comes experience and expertise, so I embrace it.
And a sore hip.
I know, and I'm feeling that right now. You couldn't have said a better thing. That's exactly what I'm experiencing right now. Oh, my God, but enough about that. We're gentlemen of a certain age. Deal with it. But guess what? You're just listening to our voice, so you don't have to see us. So that's even
right.
better.
Thank goodness for that. Oh, let's talk about cameras, guys.
Well, I want to start with ProRes Raw because I think that is an important feature in a lot of the cameras we're going to talk about today, and I want to make sure that people understand what that is. I want to make sure I understand what that is. What is ProRes Raw?
We'll let Matt do that. He's a white paper guy.
Yeah.
White paper guy. Now you're throwing me under the bus again, Naso.
Double whammy.
So yeah, ProRes Raw was announced just prior to NAB. Now this is Apple's latest codec, and it's updating the ProRes family, which has been around for a long time now. I think 2007, from memory, I think is when ProRes was originally released by Apple. So, their codecs have got a little bit long in the tooth. They're still being used in a lot of different capacities, but I think it was about time that they sort of brought them into the future, so to speak. So the whole premise of ProRes Raw is it gives you the performance of ProRes with the flexibility of Raw. Now that's sort of their catch line, and there's two different variations of ProRes Raw. It's not just ProRes Raw. There's two versions of it. So the first one is ProRes Raw, and then there's a ProRes Raw HQ. Now, the thing to remember about both of these new RAW codecs is that what they allow you to do is to bring this material straight into Final Cut and then use it straight away. So there's none of this sort of post-processing problems that are normally associated with a lot of proprietary RAW formats. Now, in terms of data rates, now this is the big thing here, is that ProRes Raw is the equivalent data size of a normal ProRes 422 HQ codec, and ProRes Raw HQ is about the same size as ProRes 444 XQ. So the beautiful thing about ProRes Raw is that you can just bring it into Final Cut Pro, put it on your timeline, and edit it instantly, play it back in real time without having to do anything. Now, I think it's a really important step forward for our industry, I think because Apple is trying to at least give us some type of sort of standardized RAW codec. Because if we have a look around, there's so many different proprietary RAW codecs from companies like Arri, from Red, so to try and get some type of industry standard, so to speak, when it comes to RAW is something that's really good. Now, so basically what Apple have done here with ProRes Raw is what they're doing is they're taking the same sort of compression foundation of the original ProRes and they're applying it to the pixels that are arranged in the Bayer pattern instead of the traditional YPB PR component video pattern. So in practice, this is, that sounds pretty simple, but it's a lot more complicated what's actually going on in the background. So there's nothing magical about RAW. It's just a really efficient way of taking the data off a Bayer pattern sensor with minimal processing and recording it at a high enough bit rate and low enough compression that you can then apply the digital processing that's otherwise done in camera. That's all it is.
So it is compressed, even though it's raw.
Yeah, well, if you have a look actually at most of the RAW formats that are out there on the market today, really the only uncompressed RAW format is Arri RAW or to a certain degree the lossless RAW that's available to be recorded on some of the Blackmagic cameras. Everything else has some type of compression to it. So, the whole thing with this is that it really depends at the moment, because of the way ProRes Raw has been integrated, that it's only currently available, being recorded on external recorders from Atomos currently. So there's no cameras that internally record this, apart from the DJI Inspire 2, I think, which is able to record ProRes Raw from what I believe. So it really depends at the moment in terms of the bit depth and the color space is up to whatever the camera can output over its, over RAW. So currently, I think 8 cameras are supported by the Atomos Shogun series and the Sumo in terms of recording this. And the biggest problem at the moment is it's still very much, because it's an Apple thing, it's limited to Final Cut Pro. It's not available in any other editing NLE software. It's not available in Resolve, none of these other things. And so there's going to be a bit of a speed bump or a roadblock, so to speak, until we see this getting integrated into more systems. Now, this isn't a closed type sort of thing, that Apple is just going to keep for Final Cut Pro. They've already said that they're going to, license it out to different companies to use in cameras, to use in NLEs. And I think we're not going to see adoption from camera companies in terms of the ones that do record ProRes, that will be able to record ProRes RAW in their cameras, until this gets support from all the other major NLEs and programs like Resolve and things like that. So that's the stumbling point at this stage.
You know how the Red Raw color options within Final Cut is like its own little app. It opens up. You can adjust all the settings from the camera. You can do all of that in the Red Raw that's within Final Cut. Are there any advantages to the color workflow by using ProRes Raw beyond just having higher quality?
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting saying that. Ben Allen, ACS, who does quite a few articles for us and is a very technical-minded guy, recently wrote up an article about, sort of explaining in a little bit more depth about ProRes Raw. And he did a few tests just to sort of demystify, I think, that sort of thing that you're talking about. A lot of people were worried, and they were saying, this ProRes Raw, it's not really RAW because, it's not giving you control over your white balance and your ISO before the debaya, blah, blah, blah. That's one way of looking at it, but you really have to look at ProRes Raw almost in terms of, what Apple did with Final Cut Pro. They took something and they changed it around and made it work in a different way. And that's almost what's happening here with ProRes Raw. No, you can't change your ISO and your white balance before the debaya, but you don't really need to with ProRes Raw. You can easily go in and use the color correction tabs and systems within Final Cut to do all those sort of changes that you would normally do. And Ben did some tests where he was, basically comparing lossless RAW against ProRes XQ4444, all done on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro, and he was doing overexposure and an incorrect white balance, and then seeing if he could manipulate those back. So he could do that using RAW controls, or he could also use the controls within Final Cut Pro and get an exact same type of result. So, while some people may argue that, it's doing it in a different way, and yes, it is. If the end result is the same or similar, then, we don't really need to have this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at that article now, and I'll put this in the show notes as well. It's good to know, because I think some people, if you're coming from a Red Raw environment, then your expectations with RAW is camera control. If you're just purely thinking about it from a color standpoint, like you said, RAW will give you the ability to make any changes that you would do through camera controls within the color system that you're using, because it has all the quality, all of the image quality that you need in order to make those adjustments. At least that's how I understand it. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
It might also, and I haven't used it because I don't really know exactly, but I think that, it is a very high quality, as far as bits go. There's a lot of them in there compared to, it's higher than 10-bit. I think, what is it, like 12 or 14? So you're talking about a very high quality, smaller, file it's just going to make all of our lives a little easier in those platforms that we use them in. And I think that's kind of like, in a nutshell, how important having this ProRes Raw is, because right now, other than like a Cinema DNG, which is a very clunky, very fat, codec, hard to work with, this is like jogging down the beach compared to climbing a mountain for a codec. It should be a whole lot easier to do and work with.
Yeah, and the thing to note too with ProRes Raw is that it's unlike normal ProRes, which is more of a sort of based on a variable bitrate codec where it fluctuates depending on what you're doing. With ProRes Raw, from what I understand, is it's the same. So it's not a variable bitrate. You get the same quality, the same bitrate across all your recording. It doesn't dip up and down like normal ProRes does. So as Eric was mentioning, I think the big benefits here is that you don't necessarily have to have this argument anymore for certain productions. Once this becomes more available in cameras and supported by other NLE systems and color correction programs, is that you won't have to have this argument on productions as to, hey, we can't shoot RAW because it's too expensive. It's going to take up this much data. It requires all this sort of processing. It's like, well, now you can use ProRes Raw for your production and then be able to turn around and use this material quickly in a nice sort of packaged format that's not too big, that's easy to work with. You can work with this on a simple laptop, play it straight away on a timeline, edit it, deliver it.
One thing about Apple, and maybe let's put this in perspective a little bit, because only a year ago, all the pros in the video production, filmmaking world were basically telling each other and Apple that Apple doesn't care about them anymore. Yeah. And that they're abandoning the professional market. Well, within that year, we have an insanely powerful iMac Pro and ProRes RAW to go with it. Yeah. So I really think that kind of shows, I think, us in the production and filmmaking community, that Apple is taking us seriously, because they're giving us not just, kind of like keeping up, but actually creating and giving us things that's going to make our lives better and easier. So I find that very interesting, perspective-wise of what's going on with Apple and the pro community. One thing I'm also kind of curious about is how apparently Red has a patent on recording RAW formats internally. And that's kind of why Sony has been putting their RAW abilities on a purchased back, say for the FS7 or the SDI out. You have to pay for that, on the FS5 Mark I. So I'm wondering if there is some kind of infringement issues with recording RAW internally in cameras these days.
I mean, it could well be the case. I'm not sure exactly what the pattern is that Red has on internal RAW recording, because as you said, there is numerous other companies that are doing it, whether it's internal or going externally to sort of like a clip-on module like they do on the Sony F5 and F55. Because Arri have cameras that record RAW internally. But I think they're doing uncompressed, so it probably doesn't infringe on that patent. I'm not sure though how that works, because Blackmagic, obviously you can record a form of uncompressed RAW and also compressed versions of RAW in their Ursa Mini Pro cameras. So maybe, who knows? I think that's probably something I guess everybody has to look at. I'm sure all the major manufacturers are aware of these patents and won't put something in that's going to infringe on the patent. So it'd be interesting to see how this works, because I guess ProRes RAW is actually doing it in a different way to most other RAW codecs. So whether this has anything to do with patent infringements in the future moving forward, I guess we'll find out.
Let's stay on Blackmagic for a couple of minutes here, because they have the 4K pocket camera, and I'd love to know more about it. This was kind of one of maybe the most talked about camera release out of NAB that I've been reading about. Tell us about it.
Well, it's an interesting camera. It's definitely not a pocket camera anymore. It's more of a cargo pants camera. Yeah. It's really quite large compared to
it looks
the
big.
Former model. Yeah. They put a lot of tech in it. It looks interesting. I definitely want to try it. I think having it being 4K is kind of like the answer everybody wanted from that camera, the original Pocket. And it's been a while. That camera was out 4 years ago or something. and it was popular. It did have some issues, and battery life was one of them, and monitoring was an issue because the screen was bad. This one also doesn't have an EVF, so you're going to use that large 5-inch monitor in the back. It's going to use those Canon batteries at LPE6, and the runtime, again, I think is going to be an issue for some people, so probably going to see a lot of rigs and powering the unit externally with larger batteries to get longer life. But it looks like they're using, a Micro Four Thirds sensor. I keep hearing that it's the same sensor that's in the GH5S. So this is like the full size, they're calling it, Micro Four Thirds sensor. Because it has the dual pixel, I'm sorry, not dual pixel, but because it has the dual native ISO, it shares a lot of the characteristics of that sensor that's in the Panasonic camera. Having that go so high in ISO levels is pretty impressive. I mean, I did a review on the GH5S, and I was very surprised how they're able to get that small sensor to gather so much light and be so sensitive. It's an impressive thing. However, with that, there's also some pretty crazy noise reduction going on in the camera that's almost voodoo-ish because it does clean it up, but you also get issues with plastic skin and some aggressive, you know what noise reduction does to things. It makes it kind of look like plastic a little bit. So once you go to a certain point, which, you know, to me, it's those ridiculous points. It's like, you know, 10,000 and 20,000 ISO, which is someplace that's like, I don't go. You're going to start seeing that softness of the image. But the camera is really interesting. I mean, like I said, it shoots 4K. It's very light sensitive. It has the Micro Four Thirds mount. You can put a ton of different lenses on that camera. It will ship with DaVinci Resolve Studio, so that's like a $300 value, which is great. It's supposed to have 13 stops of dynamic range, which, you know, I mean, that's not super impressive, but that also doesn't suck. It probably is pretty close to being what it will be. It won't shoot, and we already talked about this, it won't shoot ProRes RAW. And when I asked them about that at the show, I actually was a little bit surprised because they were kind of like, man, we're not all that excited about putting that in there because we have our own RAW, right? So, so they're going to stick with that for now. We'll see. I think if people really, really want something and they really cry for it, you know, that's how you get change, right? You have to complain a lot. But it shoots a lot of ProRes. I mean, you got all the flavors of ProRes. You have Cinema DNG. It's loaded with codecs. It should make people pretty happy. It has 4 microphones that's built onto the camera itself, which is really interesting. I don't know any cameras that actually are focusing that much on onboard audio like that. Microphones. So that's kind of an interesting idea. It has a mini XLR input that also carries 48 volts of phantom power, so you can get your pro mics in there as well as 3.5 stereo audio jack. So definitely nice to see a lot of audio options on such a small camera. Doesn't shoot like a ton of high frame rates. I think it basically goes up to 60 frames per second in 4K, which is, well, that's still pretty darn impressive when you think about it. A lot of the hybrids are not doing 4K in 60.
Yeah.
So it's a packed camera and all for $12.95.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible what they're putting in here. And it's like, it's almost like, it feels to me like they get together in the room and they say, what can we put in this? I don't want to spare anything. Like, let's put as much as we possibly can in this thing and just show that this is our goal, is to have as much capability as we possibly can at the lowest price. Like, these guys keep doing it over and over again, and it is impressive. Yeah.
Another great feature that nobody else has is the ability to use USB-C connected media drives. So you can basically get a small, and now they're making them, a lot of them, like, you know, Western Digital, Angelbird, they all have these credit card size hard drives that are SSD drives that are like 2 terabytes up to. I mean, you can record and then you can just plug it straight into the camera. And I'm sure people are going to figure out, people will figure out how to mount them into some kind of quarter 20 mount or something. These things are going to be in a cage, right? We all know that. This thing is going to be loaded up. It's going to look like the original, cinema camera that Blackmagic had. It's going to be giant. But that's a great feature, just to be able to have that ability to be able to record directly to a hard drive like that. So they're thinking a lot about the externals on the camera, which I find that really, smart, because they know that people are going to want to use it in a lot of different ways. And at that price point, again, I can't imagine why you wouldn't have one. Just like it's the best crash camera you can ever have, right? So it's the tiny little thing that you can record internally or do all the external stuff too. So it's a very interesting camera.
It really is. Now, I am an FS5 owner. I have the first one, FS5, Sony A7S2s, all of that. I was desperately hoping, fingers crossed, that an A7S3 would come out in NAB. It did not. A little bit of a bummer, but it is what it is. But what did come out is an FS5 II, which I was excited about until I read what the updates are, and it doesn't seem like much, and would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, the FS5 II is virtually an FS5 with a firmware upgrade. I mean, that's the long and the short of that. It looks almost completely identical to the original FS5. The only thing, as the Sony representative pointed out to me, he said, "Oh, but the ND filter wheel is a different color, and it's got an FS5 II badge on the side of it." So,
sold.
Yeah,
I
sold,
want one.
Exactly. So, really, I'm not really quite sure why Sony have done this. Put out the FS5 Mark II. I mean, it's not that much different. The big difference that Sony are touting with this is new color science, which sounds could sound a little bit strange to people, just saying, hey, look, we've refined the color science, given the camera more natural highlight roll off, improved skin tone renditions. That's what they're saying about the FS5 Mark II, which sounds a little bit strange, because then I guess, other users of cameras like the FS7 and things like that are going to say, well, hey, how come we can't get improved, color science as well? Surely that's just something that's manipulating what's already in the camera that could probably be achieved via firmware, so to speak. So, I mean, really, there's not a lot of other differences with that camera. In terms of recording some of the higher frame rates, it is doing a little bit more than what the original FS5 could do, in terms of, taking away burst modes and making it continuous, and a few things along those lines. So, I mean, it's virtually like before. The FS5 last year had a firmware upgrade where you could record up to 240 frames per second continuously in 2K to the external recorder, but you had to purchase that Sony license, which was an additional sort of $500. So now, like, the FS5 II basically sort of has that included in there. So it's not, you're not paying for that license. The license is sort of virtually in there. In terms of internal recording, the FS5 Mark II can do 2K at up to 240 frames per second in 8-second burst. It can do full HD continuously at 120 frames per second, and it can do 8 seconds of 480 frames per second or 960 frames per second, but obviously those are at lower resolutions than HD.
The biggest bummer to me
that's about
is,
it, Ben. I'm afraid it's not a...
I think, honestly, the biggest news is what hasn't changed, and I cannot believe that this is still 8-bit 420 and 4K. What is going on? It's a brand new camera. What are you doing?
It's called protecting your lineup.
Oh my God, that is so frustrating to me. And you have it right here in bold, because I think right on your article, it's in bold, and I think you did that. My guess is because people assumed that there had to have been some sort of upgrade. Maybe it's the sensor. Maybe it's the recording format. What is it? But the fact that it does not have 422, 10-bit, 4K is crazy.
I'd even settle for 422 and 8-bit. I mean, there's a point, maybe just that small little 2 is a lot, and maybe a lot of people, I do honestly think that Sony and Canon believe that you don't need 10-bit. I do believe that. And because these cameras are designed at $5,000, around a $5,000 budget, and they think that this stuff's for web, and 99% of you don't need it. And, we have to, it's more important for us to protect those cameras that cost $9,000, $10,000, $15,000. So
they may believe that,
kind of
but
what it is.
I think so. But there's so much talk about, and it's and it's worthy of it. But there's a lot of talk about how great the HD is on the FS5, and it's because it's 10-bit. Like that's what makes that HD so good. And the fact that there was so much talk about that when the camera came out, I think lends itself to the fact that people are noticing it, and people are seeing that in color grade. I don't know. It annoys me. I was really annoyed by that.
Well, 10-bit is a big difference from 8-bit. I mean, it's a huge upgrade in color. So, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think everybody deserves it. I think it's just really kind of a silly thing in 2018 to be still using the same, 8-bit 420 that we've seen in every camera, in the last few years. It's going to happen. I think this is like HD only cameras are gone. They're all 4K now as well. So yeah, I think we're just it's going to happen. They're just going to drag their feet as long as they can. The camera also does give you the raw output option for free, so that's not an upgrade anymore. So at least they give you that too in the Mark II.
Well, and these cameras too, if they stick as 420. 8-bit, they're the cameras that are keeping external recorder companies in business.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Maybe there's a deal there. I think you're right.
ProRes Raw kind of does that too right now for Atomos. I'd have to say that this is probably the biggest big breath of fresh air for them, because if cameras are getting better and people have somewhat cut the cord with the external recorders because of that. This is, for as long as ProRes Raw is only available in an Atomos recorder, that's going to help their business a lot.
There's a couple more cameras here. We don't have tons of time to talk about everything. Sony put out a new Handycam, the Z280 and Z190. Canon has the C700, which seems just like an upgrade on the sensor. There's new EVA1 firmware. Is there any of this stuff that you guys think is notable that we should mention here before moving on to, lenses and lights and all that stuff?
I'll say something about the EVA 1. That's an aggressive camera and an interesting one for people that really want to have that camera that does kind of like more than in a small cinema camera that's around $5,000. Yeah. That camera, if you're really into the codecs, really into all that high-end stuff for the small camera, that one's the only one that I know that delivers that way. I mean, it has everything, and it's just you have to be comfortable with the idea that you're shooting a Panasonic camera, and that's not a big deal. It's just you just have to sort of and not focus on autofocus, which is what's like Canon's big thing. They all have their own little mojo, right? And you got to kind of decide what mojo do I need in my productions. But and I look at that as the Canon has all the color science and they give you that dual pixel autofocus, and Panasonic's just giving you a ton of codec options, a ton of better bit rates internal and raw out and everything. So it's interesting. But yeah, the EVA 1 I think is a pretty darn nice camera for that price point if you need quality.
Now, the EVA 1's been out. What the news is that there's a new firmware, bumping it up to version 2.0. So what did that do? What are some of the notable things that the new firmware has done that's made that camera even better?
Well, it just basically enabled the raw output on the EVA 1. So it can output 5.7K at up to 30 frames per second, 4K in a 4/3 frame at 60 frames per second, and 2K in the 4/3 frame at up to 240 frames per second. It also, you got the all-eye intraframe codecs, so 4K at 400 megabits per second, UHD 400 megabits per second, 2K Full HD at 200 megabits per second. These are all in 422 10-bit, and a couple of other different things. I think interval recording in a few different modes, and expanded lens compatibility with some of the Sigma Art Series lenses. Now, what I still find strange about this is, they announced this firmware and released it, and, Atomos could record their the signal coming out of there, but still nobody can record the 5.7K raw output, which was the big selling point, at launch of the EVA1. None of the Atomos products can do it. Nobody else can do it, and they're still very cagey. You can't get an answer out of anybody from Panasonic or Atomos or anybody else in terms of how is someone actually going to be able to record this 5.7K raw output? Because currently you can't.
It says here that, let's see, I'm reading here, EVA version 2 firmware update that unleashed raw output in the use of ProRes Raw with the Atomos Inferno. So can it get ProRes Raw out of it?
Well, no, there's no such thing as getting ProRes Raw out of it. ProRes Raw is just simply the format that the Atomos recorder is able to record that raw signal in. So it can take just
I
like
see.
all the
So
other
it's
cameras,
taking
it
the
can take
raw
it out.
signal. It's taking the raw signal and turning it into ProRes Raw.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
I see what you're saying. Okay,
But it
yeah,
still
that makes
can't be
sense.
done in. Nothing is still out there on the market that's available to record the 5.7K raw signal, which is, I think, what everybody wants answered, but nobody seems to have an answer for us.
So that's interesting. So earlier we were saying that no cameras shoot in ProRes Raw. That is still true, but this just allows you to take a raw signal and turn it into ProRes Raw. Can it take the FS5 Raw?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
FS5,
Okay.
FS7, FS7 Mark II, FS700, C300 Mark II, C500, and the Vericam LT, I think, from memory, are the cameras that are supported by, where ProRes Raw is able to be recorded via the raw stream from those cameras to a compatible Atomos device.
I see what you're saying. So when you say that the cameras can't record in ProRes Raw, what do you mean by that, different than the fact that a recorder can take a raw output and turn it into ProRes Raw? Like,
Well,
what
it's
would
just
the
that none of the
differentiator be?
cameras can actually record ProRes Raw internally on their cameras. The only way at the moment, presently, is that a raw signal needs to come out that then can be encoded and then recorded as ProRes Raw to one of those Atomos devices. So there is no camera currently out there that can actually just record ProRes Raw internally by itself.
It's all about licensing, Ben. I mean, these companies have to, just like ProRes, they have to pay, a licensing fee to get that codec in their products. And there's also, Apple doesn't make it easy. They have to, apply for it and explain why and how they're going to integrate that into their products. So it's not a simple process for camera companies to go through.
Let's take a quick break here and talk about Hedge. Hedge is backup software for filmmakers. That's it. Simple. And that's kind of what they're all about. The application is crazy easy to use and insanely fast, which is key. I use it on set because I always want to have multiple backups on set, and that's why I use Hedge, because you can import multiple sources and send it to multiple destinations. Think about that. You have all the camera cards from your camera operators. You have your audio card. You can import everything and send it to multiple destinations. So I personally like to have 2 backups before we leave for the end of the day. And that's what Hedge allows you to do seamlessly and quickly. So it's perfect for creating multiple backups. Now, if you have the Hedge Connect app, which is a free app, it lets you know when the transfer is done. So you get that notification right on your phone. So like we'll break for lunch, I'll fire up Hedge, go eat, and then I get a notification on my phone. Everything's done. And I know it's done perfectly. So I have peace of mind when I give the cards back to my operators. And isn't that what this is all about, right? Hedge is constantly being updated. One of their newer features is automatic duplicate detection, which is huge. They have a free trial available. They have project licensing. So if you only want to use it for just one project, there you go. And you can get a 20% off discount of the full price by going to hedge.video/Go Creative Show. It's a no-brainer. So get out there, check out that website, get your 20% off discount, and start using Hedge. Now let's get back to it. So much more to talk about with Matt and Erik. The Atomos Ninja 5 is a welcome return to the 5-inch monitor for these guys. I love the 5-inch monitor. Yeah. I just feel like that's a perfect size, and I'm so happy that they did this. Anything else important about this particular monitor other than its size that we should mention?
Oh, for sure. I got a touchy-feely it. I didn't get to see it. It wasn't turned on, unfortunately, at the booth the days we were there. But really a nice
Why not?
monitor.
Why would
I'm not
so
sure.
Stupid.
I think they were having some technical difficulties with it. but to
Perfect
me,
timing for technical difficulties right there on the show floor when News Shooter is there looking at your product.
That's right. I think it worked on Thursday. I'm not sure. But no, the monitor's nice. I mean, it's all aluminum, so they got away from the plastic outer, casing for it.
Nice.
It just feels really nice in hand and feels durable. There's no more open slots on it to cool it down. Jeremy mentioned that it's all new chips in there, and processor it runs more efficiently battery-wise. It's going to stay cooler. There is an internal fan inside of it, but it doesn't it's like zero noise. It's just something that it's in there just for the processor area, and it'll only kick in, he said, basically like if you're in the desert or something like extreme, but you won't hear it.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, that's a big deal because the fan sound has kind of plagued those recorders for quite a while.
Yeah.
The one part that I found super interesting about the recorder is that it has a data port inside where the battery compartment, where you slide the battery in. Now, this opens up a lot of possibilities for the Ninja 5 to be able to interface with other devices, say like a wireless video transmitter system. So you can just slide a little module in there and then put the battery on top of that. So it kind of just plugs in, almost like a battery slot would, right?
Yeah.
Now, another thing that makes that interesting is that why couldn't we add an SDI input on that recorder? It's because it is a HDMI only. And being with Atomos's abilities to have ProRes Raw in their devices, if this monitor ended up getting ProRes Raw, now you have an HDMI 5-inch monitor with ProRes Raw that can actually get the signal through an SDI connector, because we don't have a camera, and I don't think it's technically possible to have, for at least for the codecs right now, to have a raw signal come from an HDMI source, because the data is probably too large, and would require it requires SDI. So until something like this happens, you're not going to see a raw camera, say if they decide to put in the GH5S, now has a raw output, right? So
yeah,
you got to be able to get. They have to develop it. I think if camera manufacturers can develop raw in a HDMI camera, then that obviously could work, but it doesn't exist at this point. But like I said, having a module with SDI on it makes a lot of sense, because the recorder's under $700. It's pretty inexpensive, and be able to turn that into something really powerful. And a 5-inch monitor to me is a really nice size. I like 5, and it's daylight, has the OS that they've been using, so it's a very it's very similar to the operating system on the other monitors. So I think they got a good product on their hands with this one, and maybe we'll see an update to some of their 7-inch monitors as well with that casing, because it really solves a big problem for them, and that would be really nice to see.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about this one. That's probably something that I will end up purchasing. I do like it, and I'm looking for an upgrade from my video devices Pix E5, which I do like, but it's just very limited on the codecs and formats, and it's sort of I don't know. It's getting frustrating, and it's a little bit heavy, and I'm starting to look elsewhere. Although I still am a big fan of it, but I'm looking elsewhere. And this might be the one. Let's see, what else with cameras? C700, anything really to say about that one?
Other than we're just moving into the full frame thing, where cinema is, I think we have almost all the big boys have their full frame cinema cameras now. And
well, is this fully full frame? Is it
yes,
or is it a little bit different than like a 5D full frame?
Oh, it's designed for video, so it's definitely going to have the right aspect ratios for cinema use. We're going right into that world, and I guess we probably should have known that was going to come, because all the lenses, cinema lenses, were full frame in the last 3-4 years. So it was definitely down the road. So, but we're here. So you get your full frame, you can get it now.
Now, do you need to buy the whole new camera, or can existing C700 owners swap out the sensor? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe you can get an upgrade. It's expensive, but you can definitely upgrade the sensor.
All right, so that's a good option. I've never used it. I really never see them on set, so I have like no familiarity with it. But obviously, Canon has really great images, so I'm assuming this one does as well. But I don't know much about it. Let's see. Moving on. We talked about the Ninja. Oh, do you want to talk about Tokina and their new lens here? They have a 105 that's added to their range of really nice lenses. I don't know. All of a sudden, Tokina is just like a real player in the lens. Not that they weren't a real player, but it's like, just a few years ago, Tokina was kind of just the cheap whatever lens. Everybody had the 11 to, what was it? 11
16.
to 16. And it was okay. But, no one really thought of them as higher end lenses. And I feel like that perception's changing over time. What do you guys think with the 2 new releases?
Yeah, Tokina had two new announcements at NAB. Neither of them they sort of made public beforehand. We just happened to go past their booth, and I was like, well, "What's this on the camera?" So they've taken the 11 to 20, which was sort of a popular upgrade from the 11 to 16, and optically a lot better lens than that 11 to 16 that everybody seemed to own, no matter what camera they were using. Yeah. And they've now made a cine version of that lens, the 11 to 20 T2.9. So this looks pretty impressive. I had a bit of a play with it. I think potentially, a very good replacement for, the old 11 to 16, which is getting a little bit sort of long in the tooth. And, it has really nice close focus, and optically looks fairly good. The other lens that Tokina were also showing was their new 105 millimeter T1.5, which is another addition to the Vista Prime series. So that lens will now join the 18, the 25, the 35, the 50, and the 85. Now these are all larger than full frame capable lenses from Tokina, and they're all super fast, all T1.5 through the entire range.
That's crazy. Now that's a really good lineup. It's interesting they went with 105 instead of 135. 135 is usually what you see in lineups like this.
Yeah, I asked Tokina that exact same question as to why they hadn't made a 135 and they went with a 105, and they said pretty much it was, it's virtually, well, it's not impossible, but it would have been way too hard and way too expensive to make a 135 with a T1.5 aperture.
And they wanted to maintain that speed versus the focal length. That makes sense. To keep them all the same. All right. That's good.
We're going beyond full frame now.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, the 105 lens will even work in some of the shooting modes on the Alexa 65. That's just how big the coverage is on that particular lens.
Oh, my God. It's just ridiculous. I feel like every time we talk, there's a new K. We're getting bigger in the Ks, bigger in the senses. It's crazy.
Well, Michael Cileone from Panavision did a LumaForge talk about all this recently. It was enlightening, and it was really kind of interesting because I'm more about, and I know a lot of us we talk this way, is that I'm more about better pixels than more pixels.
Yeah.
But I think that what these guys are saying is those two things go hand in hand as we move up the Ks. It's gonna happen. Just like when we went from standard def to HD to 2K to 4K, 4K to 8K. As we keep piling on. I don't really. I feel like in my world, I always like to be one bump up from delivery, and that always seems to give me it yields a really great export. So if I'm going to deliver an HD, it's great to have 4K. Not so much just for reframing things, but it's better to have more and when you're delivering to give it that lesser resolution. But man, it's right around the corner, with all these 8K, 11K. I mean, it's not going to stop. I think that's basically what Michael was saying. The technology it's going to keep pushing, and it's beyond what we're doing with video because multimedia is huge. There's things they're doing with projections and in stadiums, and there's the Ks can be relevant for other things other than broadcast, right, or movie making. We're going to see all kinds of crazy ways of using video, so that it's not just for broadcast or for entertainment purposes. So we'll see.
Well, the sharpness, the sharpness that you get with the increase in K is something that I'm seeing a lot of people to combat that. I'm seeing a lot of people using filters. I'm seeing a lot of people seeking out vintage lenses, older lenses that are a little softer. And both of those things are things that you guys have covered on News Shooter from NAB this year. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this White Point Optics. They're vintage medium format Hasselblads that are re-engineered as cine lenses. And I love when companies do this. What did you get a chance to play around with these at all? And if so, what are your thoughts?
I did. I did see them, and they showed us some footage from the sample footage that they have of the lenses. They're interesting and they're really beautiful optics. And the idea of what they're doing is a little different than your normal rehousing. So they're not just they're taking the lenses and they're actually setting them up in a different way and lining them in a different way inside of their housings to make them more cinema ready. In other words, they're going to breathe less. Just basically everything that we need. How lenses should perform better for us. That's what they're doing to them, and they're beautiful lenses. They have that creaminess. Those old lenses that with their coatings, and they buy a bunch of lenses basically on the used market, and then they just tear them apart and they pick the best ones and then use them. It's not inexpensive, but really a great idea. And again, this is bigger than full frame, so these lenses will last quite a while on any sensor that comes out for a bit.
The image circle on these is 82 millimeters, which is crazy. It dwarfs even the Arri Alexa 65 and makes the Red Weapon Drag and 8K Vista Vision look small. You're talking about lenses that are covering sensor sizes that we haven't got anywhere near yet for recording motion pictures.
So crazy. And these are not cheap. The 5-lens set is $108,000.
Yeah, you can buy about 5 Priuses for that.
Wow. It's I mean, this is certainly an investment for people that want to spend that on their projects, but I'm sure it looks great.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of these type of lenses in a rental facilities. Or high-end filmmakers are going to want to, they're not going to buy these lenses. I mean, maybe they would. I wish I had those kind of problems.
I know, right?
What lens packages I'm going to own. But one thing that it definitely does ring true after talking to Leica and as well as Arri on their lenses, their new products. The word creamy keeps coming up. I mean, it's that's the word, and the explanation that I got from them, and it's pretty much the same across the board with this, is that sensors are incredibly sharp, and they just pull so much detail that they need lenses that can complement that in a way to make it, look more organic and just have people and things look better, instead of too harsh and too detailed, too sharp. And so we've come to that point, right? They're too sharp, It's great. It's great to have that problem.
Now, for those of us that don't want to spend $108,000, there's a cheaper alternative to making your lenses a little creamier. Schneider's True Net filters. And I love this because the tagline is "Everything old is new again," and it is so true. I remember the days of putting net over lenses. It's really, really funny. Talk to us about this. What are these, and why should people be considering these? Because I think that quest for creamier lenses, this may be the answer.
Just like what we were talking about in terms of creaminess or taking old vintage lenses to soften up images coming from modern day sensors. This is just another way of doing that. So and I guess maybe some of our younger audience probably doesn't remember the days where you'd get an old pair of stockings and wedge them back behind the lens and put it in front of the sensor, or in the case of film, in front of the film gate. there.
Yeah.
So what Snyder have done...
We used to do that, kids. Kids out there listening, that is what we used to do back in the barbaric days. We had no electricity, but we had nets over our lenses. Over our sensors, I should say.
So according to, like, I had a chat to Snyder, and they said, they did tons of research about this, because obviously people don't really want to be doing that, because there's inherent problems with putting stuff behind the lens and in front of a sensor in terms of getting, dust and debris and all sorts of things on your sensor. So trying to develop something that looks similar but can be placed, like a traditional filter in front of the lens. So what they did is they managed to develop a technique to sandwich the hosiery made on the exact same knitting machines from the 1950s between Hallmark crystal clear white optical glass. So they've managed to find this, these exact same hosiery from these machines that made these original Chanel stockings, I believe they were, that everybody seemed to like using for some reason. I don't know why those particular
Why did everyone have these stockings on hand? That's the interesting part.
Yeah, so they managed to do that and put them in front. So there's different variations. So there's TrueNet beige, TrueNet black, and TrueNet grey. So the TrueNet blacks supposedly give you like an old Hollywood feel, for if you're shooting something that wants to be romantic or elegant or seductive. You can use those. TrueNet beige is supposed to sort of give you a dreamy look from the 60s and 70s, and the TrueNet grey is just more of a sort of a muted colour and contrast. Now, these are all available in different densities. And I tried out a whole bunch of these at the show. They had a model sitting there, so we just held them up in front of the camera. And, it was interesting. I think some of them were really over the top for my liking, but some of the ones in the sort of less dense varieties, they looked okay. So again, it's just another creative option for people who want to, come up with a unique sort of look. I think these filters potentially may get a lot of use. We're going to have to wait and see. At the moment, currently, they're only available in the 4 by 5.65 inch size, and they're around $365 US each.
You guys, in your article, you have some shots using them too. I think you just said that, but I'm just scanning through it as I talk to you. And yeah, they're, I don't know. I'd be a little bit nervous maybe for some projects. Maybe just to play around with it might be kind of cool, but you can't turn that back.
Yeah,
so,
that's exactly right. You want to know
committing.
Exactly what you're doing to be using something this extreme, I think.
You are listening to the PremiumBeat.com Song of the Week. It's called Swing and Hop by Soulish. Premium Beat is where to go for all of your royalty-free music and sound effects. Their website is fantastic. They've got awesome key commands so you can fly through hundreds of tracks simply and easily. Now, I said hundreds of tracks because that's how many I listen to in a sitting, but they have thousands and thousands and thousands of royalty-free music tracks for as low as $49 each. And you don't just get the track, you get cut downs, you get loop sets. So you have incredible flexibility when you incorporate this song into your project. As always, I'll put a link to this song in the show notes, but just head over to PremiumBeat.com, listen to what they have, buy some tracks, and throw them into your project. You and your clients are going to love it. And lastly, Shutterstock. Shutterstock.com has over 8 million royalty-free video clips, and that's just video. They have photos and music and all sorts of stuff there too. Many of those video clips are in 4K, which is another reason why I love those guys. They have simple pricing. You can save hundreds of dollars by buying video packs. It's all there at shutterstock.com/video. But let's face it, it's not even the price. It's not even the selection. What it comes down to is the quality of the clips. Because it doesn't matter if they have millions of them. If they're not good quality, you're not going to use them. And that's exactly why I go to Shutterstock.com, because they have such high quality video clips, right? You spend so much time making sure that your project looks the best that it can. And if you have to throw in some stock footage clips, you want to make sure it's of the same quality or better. You want it to elevate your project. And that's what you'll find at Shutterstock. That's what I find all the time. And it's all there. Shutterstock.com/video. Take a look. Type in the search bar. I guarantee you're going to find stuff that you love. Shutterstock.com/video. All right, it's time to head back to our interview for one last time. There's still more to talk about with Erik Naso and Matt Allard from newshooter.com. In our last few minutes, I want to just hit lighting. And I know there's a bunch of options here. What do you guys think? I see a prototype here, an RGB prototype. What else is here? There's a whole bunch. Light panels has some new firmware. What do you think is important for us to know from the lighting standpoint this year? What was exciting you guys?
Well, to not be too specific, and there are some, we can talk specifically, but to me, the show was RGB time. Like, I know we said that last year, but there were a lot more prototypes last year, and at Cinegear, kind of the same thing. A lot of, we're developing. This year, there are a lot of products on everybody's showroom floor that was selling lights that have something that's available in the next, 4 weeks. So it's definitely RGB time, and we can decide how we want to use these, and are these going to be the replacement for your white lights? Because that's always an issue, is when new technology comes in, maybe we take a couple steps backwards to go forward. And so the output on white light might be decreasing, or the quality will be decreasing because, they're trying to find the way to blend these three different, colors together to create white light, or are they going to use separate diodes for just white light and then have RGB? So there's a lot of different ways to implement this technology. And it's but the question is are they good enough yet to replace your existing lights so you can have all RGB? And I would probably say maybe, but they're not quite there yet. Certain companies are doing it, are a little bit more advanced at it than others right now. I think Cineo is doing something exciting with the 410. It's very much like a sky panel. Very much like what we're seeing from the light panels Gemini. So these are starting to create their own sort of style of light, in that category. So there's good to see competition in there, because the sky panels are definitely expensive, and you get what you pay for with ARRI. It's built like a tank, and it's going to last, and it's going to be on a lot of film sets. Matt had a great article on the Gemini, and from what you can read it, it's really wonderful, because he does a good job of really shit-toning everything about it. And he's pretty impressed with that light, and it's priced pretty well. So
why are you impressed with it? What's impressive to you?
Oh, the Gemini. Well, I was sort of quite interested in the sky panels, originally, and I think the light panel offers, probably 80 or 90% of the functionality of the sky panel for less money. I think both those lights, and I think this is the other thing along with RGB that we're starting to see a lot of now when it comes to lighting, is that so many of these lights now are getting continual firmware upgrades. And these are not just little upgrades that give you incremental things. Like, it's impressive to see firmware being introduced into lights that just opens up a whole new world of creative ways of doing lighting, and adding a whole bunch of features in these lights. And this is not being charged, so you're getting a light that you can then keep for an extended period of time, and it keeps getting more firmware updates and evolving and becoming better. I mean, it was pretty amazing even just to look at the sky panels. That's up to firmware version 4 now, which they announced just prior to NAB. And it's crazy the amount of functionality and controls that are inside some of those lights. So I think along with RGB, I think we're going to see a lot more lights as well, virtually like cameras in some regards, where you're getting firmware upgrades that add new features, or, because with LED technology, it's just a question of remapping those lights and getting them to do what you want to do, particularly with RGB. There's a world of different things that are available and can be done with these lights. So just by adding firmware, you can keep changing them up and continuing to add more features over time.
Yeah, I think there was this thought when LED first started really coming on the scene that, unlike the old tungsten lights that you kept forever, the LEDs are something you're going to have to keep replacing, and they're going to burn out and this and that. And I think that's changing. I think the fact that there are all these firmware upgrades is making people more comfortable in starting to invest in a full LED kit, because these are lights that are going to stick around for a while. Maybe not as long as old tungstens, but still, their lifespans are getting longer and longer, and that is fantastic news for everyone.
Yeah, and,
I do
and
wish-
going back to RGB quickly, just to make your listeners clear about this, is that there's still some inherent problems with RGB because they generate a hell of a lot more heat than normal LED lights, and they're also a lot more power hungry as well. So the problem currently with RGB technology is that most of the fixtures that are out there are large and heavy and consume a lot of power. So until the technology comes around where those things can be improved, it's still a bit of a trade-off. You get these extra features, but you have to live with the increased weight and increased power supply requirements. And also, most of these RGB fixtures have gigantic fans and heat sinks on them to get rid of all this added heat that's being created by the RGB LEDs.
Mm-hmm. One thing I really wish that I could have saw more of, and we're seeing some from Hive, more Fresnels, LED Fresnels that are really true 650s and 1Ks. I mean, we've got a lot of panel lights, a lot, right? We've got flex panels, we've got a ton of these, and they're handy. I like them. I use them all the time. But we don't have hard lights that really replace those tungsten lights as easily. And the ones that are out there now are pretty expensive still. I think the COBs, chip on boards, is what we need, and those things have to be, I'm sure, like Matt just mentioned, they generate a ton of heat, and you have a cluster of, on a COB, that thing has to be cooled down. But I would love to see, more 650s, or 1K Fresnels that are just in a nice tight package at an affordable price. Because hard light, there's still a lot of use for hard light. I need it. I need backlights. I like having soft light, but you can't control it. And it's nice to have some really good control.
Aren't there companies that there are. I don't know why I'm making it like a question. There are companies where you can get LED replacement bulbs to put into your old Fresnels. I know it's not the exact same thing, but it's kind of a move in the right direction. But you're right. It's like, why aren't there more of those?
Yeah, Vision Smith, I actually have a couple of their lights. They're COBs.
How do you like them?
And I like them. They're just, I think they're too expensive for people to actually buy. I think you got to think about these are like $500 or $600 for these drop-ins. And, they're designed primarily for someone who owns a studio that has a grid full of these lights already existing in their system. Now, is it more practical just to swap them all out and with these new drop-in LEDs, or buy all new fixtures and remap your entire grid? I think I can understand that philosophy, as well as the idea of saving a ton of money on electricity and air conditioning, all that fun stuff, because that's expensive if you think about it in the larger scale. But I don't think a consumer would want to spend $500 or $600 on a drop-in LED for an Arri 650. And it also inherently has an issue because your tungsten bulb utilizes the reflector mirror behind the lamp. So that actually gives you quite a lot more output. Think about it as a reflector, right? So you're bouncing the light off the back of the mirror that goes into the Fresnel glass and out to your subject. Without that, technically, the COB drop-in is brighter than the tungsten equivalent bulb, but it doesn't get that extra punch from the mirror. So you're actually lower in output than you are in a traditional 650. So I found the 650 to be probably more in between, like a 300 and like a 650. So maybe around 450, 500 comparison. But the 1K to me is really close to the 650. So, and now you're talking about a big bulky light. Like I have this old Mole Richards thing sitting here. It's a giant light, but it works great for gelling and things like that. But that's a big fixture, So I don't know.
That's interesting. I wasn't even thinking about the mirror behind it, but you're right. What we're talking about, by the way, is Vision Smith relamps, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But they're inserts. You take the bulb out and you put this in, and then you have an LED light. But as you said, there is no reflector in the back. It's just going right through the lens. So I mean,
and that's the problem that they're having, getting the output to be equivalent to in practical use. Even the 300D, apertures are very bright light, but it's going to perform. It's not going to perform as well as an equivalent like 1K or 2K, or it just can't. It has to have the Fresnel on there, obviously, and to really get a lot, and then you have to really narrow the beam down to really get it. It's a bright light, though. I mean, I'll give them that. It's probably one of the brighter, COB lights out there. The Hive looks really nice too. They added two new fixtures, and I really like the Hive lights. They're designed to be like the Swiss Army knife of lighting, where you can just put a bunch of different attachments on the front, similar to what Aperture does with their Bowens mount. They've kind of making it so that you can really take this fixture to different places and how you want to use it. And I do like that philosophy a lot.
The Hive Hornet 200C and Hive B 50C. Yeah, these do look really, really cool. I'm so behind on lighting because I don't really buy that much of it. You know what I mean? Like I just have my LED. I bought the most recent purchase I got with the flex lights, which I do like, but there's just so many components to it. There's gadgets and gizmos and wires and frames, and it's a real pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem with the panel lights, and I have the same issue with them. And once you start adding, one extra thing in there, like you got the ballast, you got the controller, then you have the cables between them, then it goes to the mat, and then you have to figure out this, way how am I going to mount this thing? It's like once you try to use something like a mat, like a flexible mat or a mat in general in a traditional way, it becomes somewhat awkward. You have to to me, it's like using these things in a non-traditional way is the benefit. You do use it the ways that you can't use a normal fixture, where you can maybe, gaff tape it to a wall or make it into a circle, or turn it so they can light both sides of your subject for like talking to people in an interview situation, or I don't know, non-traditional. You have to be kind of like a real creative person to figure out how not to use it as a traditional light.
Honestly, the thing I use more than those is a cheap little, it was like $250 or something on B&H, one of their like daily deals. It was a Dracast, like foldable LED panel. And it's like, I use that more than anything. And it's not the greatest light in the world, but it works and it's super easy to set up. And it was super cheap. And it's like that one, sometimes flexibility is just going to outweigh anything when you're running and gunning, for sure. And sometimes even when you're not. So I don't know. You never know. It's like I'm a big advocate for those cheapo little LED lights because they're not perfect. They're not the best CRI in the world. But if they're easy to set up and you just get it up real quick, it could be a backlight. It could be an accent light. I wouldn't key with it, but not every light's a key light. You know?
I think that's why Astras are still so popular.
I love
they're punchy. Those. They're simple. They have no ballast attached to it that goes to the floor. It's all one piece. Just throw it up on a light stand, throw a battery on there if you want to, or just plug it into the wall. I mean, it's super easy, good light quality, and I use the heck out of those at work. They're handy. I put two of them behind a 4x4, and I get some really nice light. Some soft light, or if I need some punch, I don't have to use any kind of diffusion.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
I love those. All right, guys. Well, we are really at the end of our time here. Is there any last minute things that you think are important for people to know from NAB this year? I take that as a no. I take it as a no.
There's a million different things, but if we start talking about them, it'll go on for another 2 hours. So
I know
I think
you're
the best
right.
thing
You're right.
is just to browse through the site and see what we missed talking about. I think.
I think the last thing that I was interested about is the wireless transmission options. Teradek has new options. Small HD Focus has that, and I know this isn't something that was announced at NAB, but their ability now to be a receiver for a wireless transmission. I feel like this seems to be where the direction of monitors are going, and more people like this idea of wireless video. It's getting cheaper and cheaper too.
What was interesting,
do you have any thoughts on that?
Ben, I don't know whether you've seen this, and I don't think we reported on it because it was still very much prototype stage. But Teradek was showing me one of their wireless bolt systems. There, I think it was the the new one they've done in conjunction with Small HD. I think it was the 503 Bolt? Might be called the 503 Bolt. And what they'd actually been able to do...
Did you do a story on it or no?
No, we did a story on the 503 Bolt, but not on this particular thing. So what Teradek was showing this prototype with their own focus controller attached to it. And what they'd been able to do is integrate the system so what they could actually bring up all the focus markings and things on the actual screen display.
Wow.
So that's the first time I've seen anything like that. So instead of having it solely on the actual follow focus controller itself, all that information got embedded over the image on the screen. So that's potentially, clever technology that we could see coming to market very soon. It was still very much sort of a prototype stage, so they weren't sort of officially talking about it too much. But that to me was quite interesting in terms of the way wireless is going forward. And also other companies are now starting to do their own wireless transmission systems. MoveCam was one of them too, and also Kinefinity, the other camera manufacturer, which were using these sort of drop-in modules. So the wireless transmission systems were drop-in modules that sit inside cases, sort of similar to what you would find on some of the old E&G cameras that have the drop-in slots for radio mic receivers. Similar sort of system to that. So you'd have all these components that you can just interchange. So if you want to use a wireless receiver, you just drop it in there, you take that out. You want a camera control unit, you put that in there. So these are sort of more of the integration systems that we're also starting to see coming around.
It's becoming very, very important. We didn't even talk about Kinefinity, but they released a camera and some new lenses, the Mavo line. I'll put a link to it in the show notes because it's worth checking out. I don't see it. You don't really see Kinefinities on set in the U.S. I don't even know if they're able to be in the U.S. yet or what's going on with them. But we've been talking about it on the show. You guys at Newsshooter have been talking about them, and they are a company to watch. So it's all there at newsshooter.com. Matt and Erik, thanks so much for being on. Where can people find you online? Nowhere. Great, guys. Nowhere. Thank you. These two have absolutely no social media presence. Usually that's the question that people answer the fastest. They plug their Twitter, they plug their Instagram, that dead air was awesome.
Well, you can find me on my Twitter account at Erik Naso, ErikNaso, and also, most importantly, go to newsshooter.com, check out the articles. We have a ton of content there. It's constantly being updated, so every day, 3 times a day. That's all we ask.
Yep, exactly. And Matt, where can people find you if they want to harass you online? Where do they go?
Twitter as well. You can find me at Matt Allard ACS, or obviously at Newsshooter. If you want to address straight to any of us, I guess, Erik and I and anyone else can pretty much jump on there and answer questions on the Newsshooter account.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I am really losing my mind, and it's morning here. It's not evening like you, Matt. Well, I'll thank you for being on the Go Creative Show, and we'll be talking soon after Cinegear with Erik. So stay close to your podcast app because there's lots of gear talk still to come in about a month. So thanks, guys, for being on.
Thank you, Ben. Always great to talk to you.
Thanks, Ben.
Here we go. Matt Allard and Erik Naso from newsshooter.com. Those guys have so much knowledge about this stuff. Like, it really is crazy. I think they're insane. I truly do think that they're insane. But that's okay. It's to our benefit because they come on the show, they share their knowledge, and then we all are better for it. So thank you to those two guys. I also want to thank Matt Russell for mixing, mastering, and making the show sound so delicious. He can do the same for your projects. He's for hire. You can find him at gainstructure.com and on Twitter at gainstructure. And while you're there, tweet us. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know if you have any guest suggestions. We take them. We listen. We care what you think. And that's what we want you to let us know what you think right there on Twitter. Of course, our sponsors, Hedge.video, Rule Boston Camera, Newsshooter, Shutterstock, and Premium Beat. Without these people, the show wouldn't exist. So support those that support us. Of course, you can follow me, too, on Instagram, on Twitter, and at benconsoli.com, bcmediaproductions.com. It's all there. See you next week.